ONYX STORM is here, okay? And if you don't have time to reread Fourth Wing and Iron Flame before you read ONYX STORM, then this video is for you. If you missed the Fourth Wing recap, I'll link it on the screen and in the description box. This is gonna be a long one, okay? It's a really long book, so the recap is gonna be long as well. I'm not even gonna be able to like put in every single thing that happens in this video because it would be like 2 hours long. So this is gonna be kind of like the main plot points that you're gonna need to remember before you start reading ONYX STORM. So grab a snack, watch this in 2x speed if you don't have the time. I have my notes here and we're just gonna get started. So the second book in the Empyrean series begins right where Fourth Wing left off, with Violet awake after the Venin attack, staying at Ryerson House in Arisha, which is acting as the hub of the revolution. The protective wards of Navarre, which are provided by the dragon hatchling grounds in the Vale at Basgiath, falls short of all of the borders of Navarre, so the entire southwest coastline of Tyrrendor, including Arisha, is completely exposed, which is a fact that never really mattered when they thought that it was just like griffin attacks that they were vulnerable for because the cliffs are too high for griffins to fly over. But now that they know that there's potential venin attacks and wyvern attacks, it is a very dicey situation that Arisha is exposed and not within the protective wards. Arisha does have a dormant ward stone, but information on how to build the wards has been lost. So they don't even know if the ward stone is, you know, even possible to be used, or if it's just at this point like decorative. The biggest plot point at the beginning of Iron Flame is the fact that Brennan is alive. That was the cliffhanger that Fourth Wing left off of. So obviously Violet's asking him all sorts of questions about where he's been for the past 6 years and like what he's been doing. We know he's now going by a new name. Obviously he's Brennan Asrige, which means resurrected in Tyrish, and he's also a lieutenant colonel. When Violet asks him how he survived, he says Naelin didn't fail, but it cost him everything. I woke up on a cliffside not far from here. Marb had been wounded, but he was alive too. And the other dragons, there are other dragons here, they saved us. They hid us in the network of caves within the valley, and then later with the civilians who survived the city being scorched. Brennan also now has a rune-shaped scar on his hand, which is interesting. We also hear about the Assembly for the first time, which is a group of 7 people who are essentially the leaders of the revolution, and they're deciding what to do with the cadets who were arisen when it was attacked. They're concerned about the liability of them going back to Basgiath if they're interrogated, which could obviously give up the location of where the revolution's being staged and all sorts of like revolution secrets. But they ultimately decide that it's best for them to go back to Basgiath. The beginning of this book is honestly like info dump after info dump. We get a ton of information about the status of the revolution, and it's not looking good. Felix, who is one of the older assembly members, thinks that they have a year until the Venin completely overtake them. Brennan thinks that they have about 6 months. And since Brennan was always an incredible war strategist, Violet thinks Brennan's information is more correct. So at the start of the book, we have about 6 months to solve the Venin problem. And the beginning of this book, we're in July. So we basically have until December to defeat the Venin. In order to defeat the Venin, they need a luminary, which intensifies dragon fire hot enough to smelt alloy into the only weapons capable of defeating Venin. I didn't know what alloy was before I looked it up. So if you're like me, alloy is just like a combination of metals. So the luminaries can make dragon fire hot enough to melt certain metals into weapons that defeat the Venin. There are only 2 luminaries that we know of. One is at Basgiath and one is with Viscount Takaris in Krovla, and he is not willing to part with it. So the team is trying to figure out what to do, and they decide that it is important to leave the one in Basgiath where it is because it's likely going to be the site of a Venin attack at some point in the future because the energy in the hatchling grounds at Basgiath could keep venom fed for decades. The Revolution has known about Wyvern for a few months now, and we learned that there are two breeds, one that produces blue fire and a faster one that breathes green fire. The Assembly thinks that the iron box that Garrick found at Ressin is some sort of lure for the venom, but they had to destroy it before they could like fully investigate so that it wasn't drawing any more venom. But the craftsmanship is Navarian, so we know that Navarre has some sort of method for creating venom lures, which is very strange. After this big Revolution info dump, Violet heads into the valley where Andarna has been sleeping, and her accelerated growth is not only unprecedented, but her scales are now black because dragons are only gold feathered as hatchlings. Only the eldest of the dens can sense a hatchling's pigment. So they didn't know what color dragon she was going to turn into. She now has black scales. She also tells Violet that now she can no longer stop time. And Violet mentions that she now has coppery streaks in her eyes that weren't there before. We learn that 2 more black dragons have hatched in the last year, according to Coda, which if you remember from the previous video, Coda and Taryn were the only black dragons left in existence. So this is exciting. The black dragon den is growing. And we also get a little bit of history about the first 6 riders and how they bonded with dragons over 600 years ago. The first 6 riders were desperate to save their people when they approached the dens over 600 years ago. Those dragons formed the first Empyrean and bonded humans only to protect their hatching grounds from venom, who were the bigger threat. Taryn says, we don't exactly have opposable thumbs for weaving wards or runes. Neither species has ever been entirely truthful, both using the other for their own reasons and nothing more. T. It's now time to head back to Basgiath so Andarna can enter the dreamless sleep in the Vale. Only 4 facts are known about the dreamless sleep. First, it's a critical 2-month time period of rapid growth and development. Second, the duration varies from breed to breed. Third, as the name suggests, it's dreamless. And fourth, they wake up hungry. When the riders from Ressin arrive back at the school, they learn that Lilith had no idea about the War Games plot that Colonel Atos carried out. And the riders who went to Athbine and were presumed dead will not face any consequences for abandoning their post and not showing up for real war games. We realize that Colonel Atos knows about the venom and the wyvern, and he sent the marked ones as a trap. But he can't reveal that the riders lied about what they faced at Ressin without implicating himself. But he doesn't go away without a threat, telling Xaden that secrets die with the people who keep them. So as furious as Colonel Atos is, the group is off the hook. General Sorengale sends Colonel Atos into like a punishment post, basically. And the group has arrived in time for the start of a new school year and graduation. We also have a new Vice Commandant, Major Varish, this year. He's here to tighten the ship, as they say. Varish is evil and has killed multiple people during interrogations. He's giving Major Professor Dolores Jane Umbridge vibes. Now that Xaden has graduated and he's a lieutenant, he is assigned to a southern wing in Samara. And Violet is given 2 days of leave once every 2 weeks to fly with Taryn directly to and from Sigale's current duty station or location. Samara is an entire day's flight away, and Xaden gets the same orders, so they realize they're only gonna see each other once a week for a few hours, which the dragons are super pissed about. We get some reshuffling of leadership now that we had graduation. Dane's promoted to wing leader and Rhee is promoted to squad leader. We also have a new teacher, Professor Grady, who teaches rider survival, and he tells them there are 89 second years, which is the smallest class to walk the halls since the first 6. Taryn confirms that fewer dragons are willing to bond because they know about the venom, and he tells us that the Empyrean remains divided on whether or not we should get involved. Humans aren't the only ones keeping secrets. Also, T. As Parapet Day rolls around, Eric Greycastle is entering the quadrant. We quickly learn that Eric is actually Cam Towery, the king's 3rd son, and his father does not know he's entering the Riders quadrant after his 2nd son died during threshing 3 years ago. The king thinks that Eric is on his like big 20th birthday extravaganza trip, but he's actually entering the Riders Quadrant, and he knows that by the time he bonds with the dragon, there's nothing his dad can do about it. Our sweet, sweet Liam's little sister, Sloane, is also a first year this year. She knows what happened at Resen, and she hates Violet because she blames Violet for Liam's death. Taryn also tells us that Varish's dragon, Solus, is very unstable, and he tells us this right before Solus roasts half of the third squad, including one of the marked ones who was at Resen. Violet's starting to get super suspicious about what members of leadership know about the threats and which ones are in the dark, but she's sure Professor Markham knows everything since he literally wrote the textbook on Navarian history that all riders are taught from. On the flip side, she doesn't think Professor Kaori knows about the venom. At the end of the video, I will put up a graphic about like where everybody stands, if they know, if they don't know, and which side they're gonna fight on. But that's like where Violet stands right now with the leadership at the school. The school year keeps trucking on, and after a particularly dicey battle brief one day, Rhiannon tells Violet that she thinks the school is hiding something because there are guards outside of a door in the infirmary, and that Nolan, who's the school's mender, looks completely drained. Later during sparring, a first year comes in and kills Nadine because he thinks she's Violet. And we learn that it's not unheard of for cadets to enter the Riders Quadrant as paid assassins, and a similar thing happened to Mira because of General Soren Gale's enemies. Violet then challenges the assassin to a fight, and he says the same thing Colonel Atos said to Xaden, which is secrets die with the people that keep them. So we know that Colonel Atos has ordered this assassin to kill Violet. And as he leans in, she sees a red ring around his eyes as well, which is something to note. We also learn that Bodhi's been dealing with assassination attempts, so it seems like leadership is just trying to have the students who were at Resen killed so that they can't spread the knowledge about the venom to the rest of the school. Violet, our girl with the mind of a scribe and the heart of a rider, decides that the rebellion needs scribes. And this is an unpopular opinion because Xaden thinks that every scribe is keeping the secret to some extent, but Violet trusts her instincts and enlists Jacinia to help her start searching for books on how to raise the wards or any information on the first 6 riders. We also learn that the scribes are required to log the requests of everyone who comes into the archives, and Jacinia was logging requests for a rider who eventually was killed by Professor Markham because he kept asking for records of a border attack that never happened. So we can see why it's so dangerous that Violet is poking around the archives, but our girl Jacinia is keeping Violet's requests to herself. She's not logging them, which is putting her in a huge amount of risk as well. If Markham finds out that she's not logging requests, she could also potentially be killed. It's finally time for Violet to visit Xaden at Samara, and we learn more about the weapons that are used to kill venom. We know that they're made of an alloy that can extend the wards as well as kill venom. As Mira tells us, the wardstone's power extends out like an umbrella with spokes, and the alloy boosts the power at the end of the spokes to extend its reach. But they have to be imbued with power from riders in order to be useful. Once the power is used up, they have to be re-imbued. So we know we need a luminary to make the weapons, and then we need rider magic to imbue them with power. And we also learn that the alloy is an amalgamation of palladium, a few other ores, and dragon eggshells because the eggshells are metal and they carry magic even after hatching. As the weeks go by, Andarna is still in her dreamless sleep, and Major Varish continues to request her presence at flight maneuvers because obviously, leadership is very, very interested in Violet bonding with a Feathertail, and they really want to study Andarna, but she's not showing up for flight maneuvers, so they're starting to get suspicious. After Andarna missing several lessons, Varish charges Violet with dereliction of duty, but Taryn grabs Solus by the throat and has Varish get on his knees to apologize to Violet, which we know is not going to go over well in the future. Another big development is when Dane challenges Violet on the mat, which is within his rights since he's now her wing leader. We know that Xaden did that in 4th Wing. He tells her that he did tell his dad about Athbind, but he did not know it was a trap. But Violet still hates him for taking her memory without her consent, obviously. He also tells Violet that the scars on Xaden's back were made by her mother, and he's just been trying to protect her from Xaden in case he's been playing some kind of like revenge long game. In the same sparring session, Eric's wrist is broken, so Violet takes him to the infirmary, and he tells Violet that he knows about the Venom and the Wyvern, and that's why he joined the Riders Quadrant. He also says that his brother, who's set to take over their father's throne, also knows about it and is on the side of continuing to keep it a secret. As part of 2nd year training, we have interrogation training. So Violet and her squad are all kidnapped and taken to their first interrogation/torture lesson. Even though she's injured, Varish is completely unleashing on her, and Rhee starts to worry that he's actually gonna murder Violet for the stunt that Terran pulled at flight maneuvers. And when Varish calls in Nolan to mend Violet so that he can continue to torture her, Nolan purposefully leaves a window cracked so that Violet and her squad can escape. At this point, we overhear Varish and Nolan talking about a patient that Nolan has been mending for months, who has been in that secret room in the infirmary. The group escapes, then heads to battle brief. Now we get the craziest battle brief there ever was. It starts off with a parchment on each chair saying that Zolia, which is the 3rd largest city in Breivik, has fallen to the blue fire dragons and their riders, and nearly 10,000 people have died. Zolia is also the location of Cliffsbane Academy, which is like the flyer equivalent of Basgiath for Griffin flyers. So this is a huge deal and a devastating loss for Paramiel. Of course, we note that it said blue fire dragons and not just blue dragons, so we know that this means Venom and Wyvern, and that somebody inside of Basgiath posted these flyers to be passed out during battle briefs. So chaos completely erupts, but Professor Markham deflects by saying they're all gullible losers, essentially. And to make everybody forget about the flyers, he has Jack Barlow walk right into battle brief, and he's very much not dead, even though Violet dropped a mountain on him in 4th Wing. We learn that Jack is the patient that Nolan has been tirelessly mending for months, and it seems like he's remorseful about his behavior and wants to change, which is suspicious, but whatever. And if you thought that that was enough crazy, an attack on Paramiel, Jack Barlow being alive, there's more. We also learned that there was an attack on Samara, and Professor Devera says that one rider was gravely wounded and strongly hints at it being Xaden, so Violet does something she is going to be severely punished for. She leaves without clearance and flies to Samara to see if Xaden is okay. Turns out Xaden was gravely injured, but he was mended, is all okay now. So Violet spends some time with him and then heads back to school, and we're basically just like waiting on the edge of our seats for what her punishment is going to be. So when Violet comes back from her very uncleared leave to Professor Varish ready to punish her, Kaori shows up and says Violet has been cleared of charges because they can't expect a 2nd year to have control over their dragons when even officers struggle. Varish says that maybe Kaori has an issue with his dragons, but some of us don't have that problem. We even control them. Violet also has one of the alloy daggers strapped to her, and re-saves Violet's ass when she summons the dagger off of her body through a wall and into her bedroom before Varish and his cronies can search Violet and find it. Because Rhiannon saves Violet's ass, she comes clean to her, Riddick, and Sawyer about what's been going on, and they all ask their dragons for confirmation, and we learn that the Empyrean is split on what to do about the threats, so no dragon is gonna put their rider at risk by telling them about the threat unless they already know. Threshing Day rolls around, and of course, Threshing Day is always October 1st, so we know that we have about 2 to 3 months at this point until the Venom are completely overtaking the world. All right, so we're getting pretty close. At Threshing, Sloane bonds a red dagger tail, just like Liam, and Eric bonds a blue club tail. As a 2nd year after Threshing, Violet has to go to take like a watch post. She relieves Aya, who was another rider at Resin, and as they're swapping stations, 4 infantry cadets attack them and say they're in the rider's quadrant with express permission to be there. Aya does not survive the attack, and Violet is saved by none other than stupid Jack Barlow. So now Violet kind of owes him like 2 lives, which is not good. But she also realizes now that half the riders who were at Resin are now dead. So the assassination attempts are unfortunately working. Riddick arrives right after the attack to tell Violet that he found out about where the original journals of the first 6 riders are being kept, and that they're in a sub-level vault in the archives that Violet didn't even know existed, and they're specifically in the royal vault, and they're warded to only let someone in King Towery's bloodline in. So it's a good thing that we have a rebel prince on the premise. Eric is a little hesitant to help at first because, surprise, Xaden's the one who killed his older brother during threshing, but he gets over it because he wants to help the cause, which is why he joined the Riders Quadrant in the first place. So when Xaden is on leave from Samara, he's visiting the school, the group decides to break into the archives and into King Towery's vault, and we find Warwick and Lyra's journals, who are 2 of the original 6 riders. Violet gives Warwick's journal to Xaden, who immediately leaves to bring it to Brennan at Arisha, and Violet has Lyra's journal on her when she's stopped by Colonel Nolan. Colonel Nolan turns out to be the ultimate snake. He drugs Violet, and we learn that he knows about the venom and is on the side of the Navarian loyalists. He then lets Varish take Violet captive, which is just like sick because he knows what Varish is capable of. So the fact that he lets Varish take her, I hate him. I hate him for that. The interrogation is brutal. Varish is brutal. It goes on for several days, and at some point, he brings Dane in to read Violet's memories to find out why she broke into the royal vault to steal the journals. And this time, when he reads Violet's memories, she kind of like pushes a specific memory to him, and she shows him what happened at Resin, including the venom and the wyvern, and Dane decides to fight on the side of the rebels. So Dane's redemption arc is coming in hot. Dane stabs Varish to help Violet escape right as Xaden shows up to save her, and on their way out, they run into General Sorengale. And Violet's mom finally comes clean about why she forced Violet into the Riders Quadrant. And she says it's because she knew that Violet was smart enough to figure out the secrets Navarre was keeping if she was a scribe. And she also tells Violet that she made a deal with Xaden. Since she agreed to let the Marked Ones join the Riders Quadrant, Xaden would owe her a favor at some point. And the favor was called in to make sure nobody killed Violet in the Riders Quadrant. She also confirms that she is the one who carved the scars into Xaden's back. Apparently it's like some sort of Tyrish custom, but Violet doesn't want to hear any of it, okay? Because she's just like horrified that her mom would even do that to somebody that she loves. Xaden has distracted the leadership at the school by having dragons drop wyvern carcasses at every major outpost. So the school is kind of like in disarray at this point. All the leadership is called away in crisis as Xaden, Dane, and Violet are deciding what to do. Dane ends up telling all of the students the truth, and the Empyrean votes that it's up to each dragon to decide if they want to abandon the school, and Navarre, they can do so without punishment to them or their rider for leaving. And in the end, about 200 dragons and their riders decide to leave the school. All of the dragons and riders who abandoned Basgiath go to Arisha, and Andarna is finally now awake from her dreamless sleep. And remember, the dreamless sleep is normally 2 months. Andarna has been in the dreamless sleep for like almost 4 or 5 months. We see that she has a scorpion tail now, but unfortunately one of her wings is broken because she exerted herself too much at the Battle of Resin. And Taryn says that the elders will work with her to strengthen her wings and that she will definitely be able to fly again, but she will never be able to carry a rider. This is also where we see more of like which teachers are on which side. So we know that Markham, Nolan, and Professor Carr are obviously loyal to Navarre. Devera ends up going with the rebels, and she's the one who dropped those traitorous pamphlets about Zolia. And Professor Kaori decides his place is with the Empyrean, so he's not really taking a side yet since the dragons and the Empyrean don't have a side, he's not taking one either. While Xaden was out collecting wyvern carcasses, he also sent a message to Mira, who shows up with a whole additional riot of dragons. So now Orisha is filled to the brim with people who are ready to fight for the revolution, and it's becoming Violet's #1 priority to get the ward stone at Orisha up and running to keep all these people safe. Since they still have Warwick's journal, Violet sets to translate it until she thinks she knows how to raise the wards and determines that the strongest riders in residence have to use their blood on the ward stone to like imbue it with their magic and their power. So Violet has all of the most powerful riders at Orisha try it. It doesn't end up working, which tells us that something is wrong with the translation of Warwick's journal. So the group realizes that the only way forward now is to meet with Viscount Takaris to get the luminary, and Violet starts training her signet with Felix instead of Professor Carr. Felix is teaching Violet some really interesting things about her signet that Professor Carr never cared about because he just wanted her to be like as powerful as possible. But Felix tells Violet that she can wield lightning from the ground, from the sky, from her hands, and she needs to learn how to control it. Professor Carr never wanted her to control it. He just wanted her to be a big threat. So Violet has her work cut out for her with Felix. Felix does give her a conduit to practice controlling her power, and he tells her that she wields pure power in the form of lightning because that's what she's most comfortable with, but it can take other forms, which is interesting. Everyone's kind of like so excited because there hasn't been a lightning wielder in centuries or whatever, but apparently Violet's signet really is just excessive amounts of power. Now that we're in Orisha, we learn more about runes as well. And runes are wielded power woven for set purposes, but Basgiath does not teach runes. They were banned a couple hundred years after unification because they're an equalizer. Griffin flyers could be just as powerful as riders if they continued to use runes. And we also learn more about the rebellion relic as they relate to runes a little bit later, but I'm just going to share it here since we're already talking about runes. So Colonel Miari, Liam and Sloane's mother, was apparently like a rune master. Nobody could do runes like she could. And she made protection runes for each rebel child, all 107 of them. The runes were designed to counter the signet of the rider whose dragon would kill the rebels, but it would only be activated if the person was killed by dragon fire, which is the primary method of execution for traitors. All of the traitor children were holding their runes when their parents were executed, which is why the rebellion marks start on their arms. The parents knew that they would be executed at some point or another, so Colonel Miari made sure that they were all protected. The time has come to go get the luminary because the wards aren't being raised. They need weapons. That's the only way that they can defend themselves at this point. So Brennan, Violet, and Mira decide to go without permission from Xaden or the Assembly and just get it over with. However, once they get to Corden, surprise, Xaden's already there. And this is where we learn that the Viscount's niece is Kat, Xaden's ex-fiance, and we find out that Kat is a very powerful mind manipulator who can amplify any emotion. The Viscount's term for talking about the luminary involves seeing Violet wield her signet since he's never seen anyone wield lightning before. So Violet is brought to an arena that's made entirely of stone except the field at the bottom, where a Ribestad chest is waiting for Violet. The chest belonged to Xaden's father and was traded to Viscount Takaris in exchange for Kat's hand in marriage. And the chest is special because it suspends venom in midair, so they cannot feed from the ground while they're inside of it, making it Fen Ryerson's most treasured possession. Violet is tasked with hitting the chest with a bolt of lightning, but once the guards unlock the box, the venom escapes. And Brennan and Mira are on the field with Violet, and at the last second, Mira is able to put a shield around her, Brennan, and Violet, which she's never been able to do before. But it nearly drains Mira, since this is like a new power for her and she's outside of the Navarian wards. It was very difficult for her to put up this shield. So Brennan takes Mira away and Violet fights the Venom hand to hand. She eventually is able to pin the Venom down with her daggers and electrocutes the sucker. All right, and they eventually come to an agreement to supply Takaris with weapons, as well as to take roughly 100 Griffin Flyer cadets to Orisha to train with them in exchange for the Luminary. As you remember, Cliffsbane Academy was destroyed in the Zoya attack, so they've all been with Viscount Takaris, so he's like, take some of these people off my hands, okay? But heading back to Orisha with 100 Griffins and their Flyers is no easy task, since Orisha is so geographically protected from Griffins, and they can't handle the altitude that they need to reach to fly into Orisha. So they all have to hike up the Madero Pass, which is basically like this mountainous trail laden with traps designed to kill Griffins. So the Dragon Riders and Griffin Flyers have to put their differences aside and work together to make it to Orisha. However, while they're on the pass, they're attacked by Wyvern because why wouldn't they? Apparently, the first dragon hatchling has been born in the valley above Orisha, and the magic would have alerted any creatures capable of channeling in a 4-hour radius. Because the magic that emanates when a dragon is born, it's apparently like a lure for the Venom. We also learn that the Venom share a collective consciousness with the wyvern that they create. So if one of them knows about the dragon hatchling, they're all gonna know. So they get attacked, everything ends up being okay. The gang gets back to Orisha and we get the forge up and running so that we can start creating weapons. We also have a new teacher, Professor Trissa, who's now teaching all the cadets about runes. He explains the practice of weaving runes as strands of magic pulled from our power, woven into geometric patterns for specific uses, then placed into an object for either immediate work or usage at a later date. This process is called tempering, which makes the magic active. Violet and Dane also decide to kind of start setting aside their differences because Violet needs help with Dane's translation. Dane's an amazing linguist, and he's the one who realizes that Violet's translation of the journal was actually slightly wrong. So they think they know how to correctly activate the ward stone now, but Violet's concerned that activating the ward stone isn't the right idea anymore, since now they have all of these Griffin Flyers among their ranks. As a reminder, the Wardstone makes all magic other than dragon magic impossible within its bounds. So if they activate the Wardstone, all of the Flyers at Orisha will be without their powers. As a kind of consolation to the Flyers not being able to use their power if the wards are activated, they give them all Mayorcite, which is an explosive alloy, so that they're not left like fully unprotected if they do decide to raise the wards. While they're deciding what to do, Violet and Sloane are chatting, and Sloane mentions that riders bonded to dragons who were previously bonded to a direct family member can either go crazy or develop a second signet. And this has Violet's alarm bells going off because she knows Sigale was bonded to Xaden's grandpa, but she's the only one who knows that it was actually Xaden's grandpa. Everyone else thinks it was like some sort of great uncle, and Xaden's not insane. So she's like, oh my god, he must have a second signet. And obviously we do find out that his second signet is that he's an intrinsic. He obviously didn't tell anyone because it is a capital offense and punishable by immediate execution. He can read people's intentions, but not like exactly their thoughts. So he's a sort of type of intrinsic. This is what makes him so good at like judging character, which he said he's extremely good at in the past. It's not that he's good at it, it's that he can like legitimately read people's intentions to know if they're going to be like loyal to the revolution or not. It's eventually decided with the agreement of the Flyers that the gang is going to raise the wards because it's the best method that they have for protection. But this time, instead of using the rider's blood, they used dragon fire to activate the ward stone right as a horde of 17 wyvern approach. And one of the wyvern tries to cross over the boundary and immediately like falls from the sky. So we know that the wards are now in effect in Arisha, which is great. Shortly thereafter, General Melgren sends a message to the rebels requesting to meet with no more than 2 marked ones, obviously, and Violet and Mira, which means that their mother is likely going to be there as well. Before they leave to go to the meeting with Melgren, Kat's sister Serena tells Violet that she can still use her powers, which means that something is not 100% right with the wards, even still. So the gang goes to meet Melgren and General Sorengale, and Melgren tells them that he foresaw the Venin attacking Samara on winter solstice and that the Venin will win. But he says if the rebels fight with them, it can change the course of the battle. And if they do this, he will respect their wish for independence. Yeah, right. As one of the heads of the assembly, Brennan comes forward and Lilith is extremely shocked. So we know that she wasn't in on any ploy to keep him alive in secret. And Brennan declines their offer of working together. We later learn because he feels that the casualty rate among flyers and riders would be catastrophic, and they'd have no way to defend the kingdom if they lost so much of their forces. So they're like, we're not gonna help you, we're safe behind our wards, we're just gonna let it ride. However, Lilith tells Violet that the wards are gonna fall because they only have Warwick's journal, which is a lie, because he wanted Navarre to be the only one with wards. Lyra, however, wanted the knowledge to be shared with everyone. So Lilith gives Violet Lyra's journal and tells her to cut the bodies of the dead wyvern open to see what they find. Okay, that's suspicious. So back at Arisha, they cut open the wyvern to find runes inside of them. So they're basically weird reanimated puppets of some sort. As the rebels continue to prepare for more Venin attacks, we're now 2 days from winter solstice, and Violet realized that Melgren was actually bluffing. The Venin have been camped out right outside of Samara with 500 wyvern for 3 days and haven't attacked at all. So instead it seems like they're waiting for something, and Violet realizes that actually what they're waiting for is the wards to fall. That's when they realize that the real fight is going to be at Basgiath, but Melgren can't see it because Violet and all the other marked ones as part of the revolution are going to be fighting at Basgiath. So Melgren can't see it, and Samara's just a ruse by the Venin to distract the Navarrian forces while they take down the wards. The rebels have to decide if they want to go back and fight, and decide that they'd rather risk death than become like Navarre and sit around and wait to see what happens and to leave everybody to fend for themselves. The assembly does not agree with untrained cadets flying into enemy territory and vote against everyone leaving. And they think Violet's wrong about the real fight being at Basgiath. But the thing about being an assembly of rebels is that the rebels are going to do what they're going to do, regardless. And of course, they are going to join the fight. The flyers end up having to stay behind because they won't be able to use their magic in Navarre within the wards. So the Dragon Riders get a move on since they now have less than 2 days before solstice and the Venin attack at Basgiath. And Brennan and all the first years stay behind at Arisha with the flyers. 18 hours later, we're back at Basgiath and General Sorengale is still there and the wards are still up. Violet tries to convince her mother that the wards are in danger, but Lilith is convinced that the wards are safe and no one could possibly disturb the wards at Basgiath because they're heavily guarded every moment of every day. And we also find out that all the leadership, basically every available body, was sent to Samara to fight, so Basgiath is woefully unprotected right now. Dane and Violet work to convince Lilith that they should just go check on the ward stone. And so they finally go right as night falls. It's officially winter solstice. And as they finally reach the chamber where the wardstone is, we see the 2 officers guarding it are dead. Not good. So they rush to the wardstone, which is twice the size of the one in Arisha. And it's on fire, lit on top by black flames. And who else is there besides Jack Barlow and Bade? And he says, "You're right on time, Sorengale," before murdering his own dragon. And Bade's blood extinguishes the flaming wardstone, which causes the Navarrian wards to fall and the wardstone to crack in half. After the wards fall, Jack tells Xaden that he is not in fact going to die because his dragon died, because surprise, he is a venin. Nolan storms in saying stuff along the lines of like, you're better than this, Jack, like you can choose. But we all know that Jack Barlow is going to choose violence, which he does. So Jack starts draining the ground before Xaden picks him up with his shadows and holds him in the air so he can't drain everybody else. This is also a surprise because we learned that wards actually do not block all power, and venin are just not at full strength behind the wards, but they can still feed and channel enough to survive. And he says, "We are already among you, but now we are free," which is pretty spooky. 119 cadets and 10 leadership are left at the school. That's all that they have to fight against the oncoming horde of venin that are eventually coming. And everyone else was sent to Samara to fight this like fake battle. Dane was able to read some of Jack's memories before Jack starts to try to drain Dane. And we learn that 10 hours from now, the venom will be upon them, and what they have left at the school is like not nearly enough to save them, which is a problemo. The venom know exactly where they are because Jack planted tracking runes all over the college and up the path to the Vale, which lure venom to specific locations. One of the dragons is able to get word to Melgern's dragon, but they are not going to be able to pull back their forces from Samara in time for the beginning of the battle, because as we remember, Samara is like a day's flight away. And it's now being reported that over 1,000 wyvern are on their way, and they didn't even bother stopping at Samara. So the venom know exactly where they are because of Jack's tracking runes, and Dane was able to see some of them in Jack's memories, but not all of them. So the infantry is called in and tasked with hunting down the runes and destroying them, essentially. As General Sorengale creates a battle plan, Violet realizes that the ward stone is going to be completely unprotected by the general's plan, and she thinks this is a mistake since they don't know what kind of power the stone still has, and it's placed in a location that's over the strongest natural flow of power that the school has. Lilith shuts down the suggestion to have people protect the stone and orders everyone to get some sleep before the battle begins. A few hours later, Brennan shows up with Sloane and a bunch of other first years, and Violet requests that Brennan try to mend the ward stone while Violet's squad guards the airspace around it, since part of like a mending power is that you can mend buildings and objects as well as people. Jacinia is part of the group that comes with Brennan and is working on comparing now Warwick's and Lyra's journals to find out what went wrong with the ward stone at Orisha and how that they can get the wards back up. All right, the battle begins. I am not going to recount every single detail that happens in this battle since it's like 7 chapters long, but we will hit the main points, and I'll do a where everyone is standing recap at the end, like who survives and all that. But now the battle has begun in full force, and the gang holds off the venin and wyvern long enough for Melgern to arrive, but only 2 other people could keep up with how fast Coda and Melgern could fly. So it's not like a lot of people have come to save them. Brennan is able to repair the ward stone, but they're not sure it's going to have the ability to be imbued with power, because he doesn't know like how severely damaged it was. When Violet is on the ground getting Sawyer to healers after he has his leg bitten off by a venin, she's ambushed by another venin who wants to take her to her sage, but Andarna comes out of hiding to save her. And I say hiding because she was fully camouflaged as a boulder. And she says, "I told you I could hide." And we're like, what? You're a chameleon. Okay. We then get a quick reprieve from battle as we catch up with Jacinia, who found the discrepancy between the journals, but now she thinks Lyra's journal is the lie because it refers to 7 dragon species when we know there's only 6, and the only difference between the 2 journals is Warwick's says that there needs to be 6 dragons and Lyra's says that there needs to be 7. This kind of sets off, again, some like warning bells in Violet's mind. She thinks that she realizes that Andarna is actually a 7th breed of dragon, So now she like really knows how to get the wards up. The missing piece was just Andarna the whole time. So as Violet goes to the ward stone, Xaden decides that they need a distraction. And he somehow thinks that the leader of the Venom want him, not Violet. So he goes to use himself as bait, as a distraction, so that Violet can get the wards up. Violet then has a quick chat with Coda, correctly guessing that he knows about the ward stone, and asks if he is willing to help them raise the wards, and he agrees. Violet gets to the ward stone to check if it can be imbued with power, but Brennan reminds her that the ward stone at Orisha took weeks to be imbued with power. And they obviously don't have weeks. So they send out a call to every rider that could possibly help them. And Violet talks to Andarna about what to do. This is where we finally learn that Andarna is indeed her own breed of dragon, which is why the elders could not refute her right of benefaction, which is like her ability to bond with a rider, because she is technically the eldest of her den, since she's the only one in her den. She says that she kept the secret from Violet because if Violet didn't figure it out, she wasn't worthy of knowing. And Terran doesn't know because he isn't the eldest of his den. Coda is. And only the elders know. I'm now going to read this quote directly from Andarna. I waited 650 years to hatch. I waited until your 18th summer when I heard the elders talk of the weakling daughter of their general, and I knew. I knew you'd have the mind of a scribe and the heart of a rider. Violet then asks Andarna if she's willing to breathe fire for the stone, and she responds, "It's why I was left behind." Oh, Andarna. I love her. Violet continues to imbue the stone with power and realizes the price of imbuing the stone in time to save everyone is her own life. When Terran realizes that she plans to sacrifice herself and all of her power to imbue the stone, he says, "You must save yourself. I did not choose you as my next, but my last, and should you fall, then I will follow." Lilith also realizes what Violet's doing and just drop kicks her away from the stone and turns to Sloane, who we know is a siphon, and she begs Sloane to siphon her power, which is the only way to get enough power into the stone to raise the wards. The reason that Sloane can do it herself, even though they needed weeks at Orisha, is because imbuing comes automatically to those who have a siphon signet. Imbuing only comes naturally to a few other signets, but it's a special piece of being a siphon. And when they were trying to raise the wards at Orisha, we didn't know Sloane was a siphon. She hadn't manifested her signet yet. So now that we have Sloane can siphon her power into the ward stone. But the fastest way to do it is to siphon the power of a very powerful rider and a dragon. So Lilith decides to sacrifice herself and her dragon, has Sloane siphon her power out of her and into the ward stone. And as Lilith is dying, she tells Violet, "Everything I did was to get you to this moment when you would be strong enough." Who knows what that means, but it sounds like Lilith has had a plan all along. And as the 6 dragons and Andarna fire up the ward stone, Andarna tells Violet that Xaden needs her. And she can tell something is terribly wrong because it feels like he's dying down their bond. And when Violet finally gets to him, she looks into his eyes, and we see, of course, that he has turned Venom. In the last chapter, we get Xaden's point of view of like what happened, how this could possibly happen. And we see Xaden is facing the sage, which is actually, turns out, not a sage, but the Venom general. And he tells Xaden, "I told you once you'd turn for love, and so you shall." Xaden opens his bond and feels Violet's intention to die in order to imbue the ward stone, and he refuses to let the general get his hands on Violet, but he has no power left. So he pulls power from the earth as Sigale is yelling at him, like, "You cannot do this, I chose you." But he says that Violet chose him too, and he decides it's worth it to turn to save her. After the battle, Xaden pays a little visit to Jack, asking him what the cure for Venomism is, and he says, "There's no cure. You can never give back what's been taken. You will only hunger for more." And that's the cliffhanger that we're left on. until ONYX Storm. So here's a quick recap of where everyone stands, as well as our new dragons and bonded riders. Thank you so much for watching this very, very, very long video. I know that I skipped over a bunch of things, but like, I do think that these are the most important plot points and things to remember going into ONYX Storm, based on the little blurb that we've already seen about ONYX Storm and what I think is coming in the third book. So I hope you liked this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. I can't wait to read ONYX Storm and to hear everybody's thoughts about it. Please don't leave any ONYX Storm spoilers in the comment section of this video, since obviously somebody watching this video probably hasn't read ONYX Storm yet. So please keep it spoiler free, but follow me on Instagram because I want to like talk to people about it and I don't know what's going on with TikTok. So follow me on Instagram if you want to chit chat about ONYX Storm so that there's no spoilers in this video. But I hope to see you in my next video. Give this video a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.